Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I don't know if you guys know this, but I used to be a really big Fashion Week girly. So I haven't been to Copenhagen Fashion Week in 10-ish years. In 2020, I visited Berlin Fashion Week, but other than that, I haven't really indulged. My relationship with fashion has changed so much over the last 10 years. I started out glorifying and romanticizing the fashion industry, and I wanted to be a part of it so badly. But since then, I've learned so much about the impact of fashion, the impact of the textile industry, and where our clothes come from. Today, I find it much more interesting that we talk about the impact of the materials we're wearing, how we can make the most of our clothing, and how we can keep brands accountable for their massive impact. I would much rather talk about greenwashing and how consumers are being misled and how we can avoid it and how we can spot it. So we are going to Copenhagen Fashion Week to do just that. During this week, I'll be seeking out and covering different types of fashion initiatives. I'll be looking for how the fashion industry is communicating sustainability, what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. We might end up looking at some greenwashing. Who knows? I'm excited and scared for the next few days, but let's go. I read recently that Copenhagen Fashion Week is allegedly the most sustainable fashion week in the world. I don't think it's interesting to look at whether or not that's true at all, actually. I think it's so much more interesting to look at, well, what qualifies the most sustainable fashion week in the world? Where are we setting the bar? Is it high? I don't think so. At least it's not as interesting as how this industry defines and practices sustainability. Because while the notion of sustainability is fluffy and abstract to the consumer, it really shouldn't be for businesses. There is a very real, very concrete definition of what sustainability means, yet it's not really adapted by a lot of brands. So one of the things Copenhagen Fashion Week is doing is that they have implemented some minimum standards that brands have to follow in order to participate in Copenhagen Fashion Week. And I thought we were just gonna take a look at what those requirements are. Focus areas are divided into strategic direction, design, smart material choices, working conditions, consumer engagement, and shows. And one of the things that I would like to preface is that these are not bad things. These are not bad actions. My critique is mainly that they're not enough to be praised for being sustainable. Some of this is just complying with local regulations and policies, and other things are just straight up virtue signaling, but I digress. One thing that I was initially excited to see just mentioned is the destruction of unsold merchandise. So this is something that happens in the fashion industry all the time, that things that aren't sold are just burned or disposed of rather than being donated or reused, because whenever you donate something that you would like to preferably sell, you lower the value of that product. So it's cheaper and better for the brand value and the brand image to destroy things rather than resell them, donate them, etc. Anyway, it's mentioned in the minimum standards that brands cannot do this. However, the main sponsor, Zalando, have been involved just very recently in several issues with burning and disposing of merchandise that was perfectly fine, that could have been sold, that weren't. So maybe these minimal standards are for small brands and not big collaborators. One requirement is that brands have a preferred materials list. And while this sounds great, it is in no way specified what a preferred material is or who sets that bar, who decides what's preferred and based on what is that material preferred. It's just preferred materials, and you as a brand are supposed to have preferred materials. My absolute favorite is we work strategically with embedding sustainability and international standards on human rights, environment and climate into our business. What does embedding sustainability mean? It is nowhere specified what that actually means. What is happening? The shows portion of this is just chef's kiss. Our design and show production is zero waste. What in the Lawrence Singer and Bea Johnson is happening to Copenhagen Fashion Week? I'm composing myself. Oh, we do not utilize single-use plastic packaging backstage during Fashion Week. I think this means that they just use single-use bamboo products instead. That seems to be what people are opting for. It's not more sustainable, but that's what people are doing. Also, carbon offsetting is a requirement. Can we just agree that whenever companies say that they're carbon offsetting or they plan to carbon offset, that we want specific documentation that they went out to that goddamn forest themselves and planted those goddamn trees themselves? Otherwise, I'm not hearing it. Then there's also a lot about anti-discrimination and generally just creating safe work environments. But what that also means is not specified, and it's also not specified how these things are being enforced. So for the most part, it seems like the fashion industry is just living off of vibes. So the requirements are great on paper, but if there's no way of enforcing what's happening, if no one is specifying what these words mean, it's just vibes. Anyway, I hope it doesn't come off as though I don't like fashion, because I really do. Love fashion, I love clothing. It seems sometimes that the fashion industry is the ones that's not loving fashion and clothing, because it becomes so disposable, even really expensive things. The way we talk about clothing often devalues the craftsmanship, the resources that go into making these things. So when we value clothing, we wear it until it breaks, we re-wear it, we repair it, we do things to make sure it lasts as long as possible. And this we're not seeing in the fashion industry. Conclusion, the fashion industry just hates fashion. Anyway, I am off to the French embassy to go see an exhibit that's hopefully going to have a sort of critical outlook, but we'll find out. And then we're going to a trade show. I want to focus on how these brands are communicating their sustainability, what they're saying, how they're advertising it. Let's go. In the best let them eat cake style fashion, which seems to be the theme for this video, we are going to CAF to get vegan croissants for breakfast. Okay, so they didn't have croissants, and a cardamom bun is not nearly as Antoinette-esque as I would have preferred, but we soldier on. Art is an extremely valuable tool when communicating sustainability. It can push agendas forward and it can help change minds and cultures. That being said, I do wish that artists dared to be a little more hard-hitting in their criticisms, and I do wish that big corporations wouldn't wash their hands in the work of aspiring artists. Fashion and art are interlinked, and so is art and environmentalism. One thing that you could argue, though, is that sustainability in art becomes very one-sided. It becomes very easily just, we're using too many plastic straws, and that's sort of where the conversation ends. So it becomes very consumer-based, right? It's trade show time, baby. At Fashion Week, we're seeing a lot of upcycled and recycled clothing, which in a vacuum might sound great, but we are seeing absolutely no conversation about reduction of clothing, quantities of clothing that we're producing. We're still seeing the same amount of collections going in and out every season, which drives the incentive for consumers to renew and repurchase what they already have. And when brands aren't really talking about the majority of the impact, which comes from quantity and not as much what kind of materials is being used, the fashion industry is very unwilling to have a conversation about why they're unsustainable, which has very little to do with materials and everything to do with how much they're producing. I've stumbled into an issue. I got a glass of orange juice, but there's no plastic recycling. There's only this regular bin. I'm just gonna hold on to this then, I guess. Zero waste issues, okay. I think I'll be going back to the trade show tomorrow. I was there for a solid hour and I was offered tote bags, shoes, everything, and it seems like recycled materials is going to save the world in there a little bit. Now we're doing something completely different. We're going to something I'm really excited about. We're going to a talk/event with World Animal Protection.
Det er et ord, der bliver smidt rundt som konfetti, og især i den her uge. Men hvis vi nu ser på, hvad bæredygtighed er, også rent lovgivningsmæssigt, så ved man som forbruger, hvad der må sælges til en. Det er den der med, at vi ikke må leve på bekostning af fremtidige generationers muligheder for at opfylde deres behov. Den er meget stor og meget bred. Men det der også er, hvis man kigger i lovgivningen, det er, at det er altså også et løfte om, at der socialt og sundhedsmæssigt, miljømæssigt og klimamæssigt ikke bliver levet over evne.
It was great to hear some opposing voices to everything that's happening in the fashion industry, and especially during a time like this at Copenhagen Fashion Week, where a lot of brands are patting each other and themselves on the back for doing the bare minimum, when in reality there's so much that we could be doing, and there are so many people that are pushing for this change. So I left there really uplifted and happy that I've gone. Also, they had wine in cans. It's beautiful. Copenhagen Fashion Week is also collaborating with Zalando and Copenhagen Airport. An airport is an airport, and Zalando sells fast fashion and have several times been involved in greenwashing issues, yet they continue to repeat the same strategies again and again. They're learning nothing and implementing the same strategies to mislead consumers as they have been doing for years. Zalando is also backed by fossil fuel companies, so there's also that. This industry is living off of vibes. Sustainability is mentioned constantly, but nothing is backed up with studies, data, or even an account of who set the bar the brands are meant to rise above. And that's because no one is. In this industry, sustainability is still such an abstract notion that it can mean anything, even when there is a very clear definition. But when no one explains what they mean by the terminology they employ, it loses all meaning. Anyway, we're meeting up with one of my favorite brands today. It's Marla Clothing. I've worked with them for years, and we're gonna talk about what sustainable fashion is. Little fit check. Now we're also going to the Alternative Fashion Week. This Alternative Fashion Week is filled with conversations that I'm very excited about having, both about waste in the fashion industry, as well as workers' rights and how we're using materials. It's gonna be critical, it's gonna be amazing. I'm very excited to go. This is such a good Red Cross store, but we don't have time to go in today. It's so good though. We're meeting up with Tutti, who's the designer for Marla Clothing. I've worked with her before. We actually did some zero waste merch together, and we're just gonna have a chat. I haven't seen her in ages, and I thought it would be a perfect rendezvous for the theme of this video. Is it just me, or are cobblestones just slightly misogynistic?
With my brand, I have of course some focus points, because sustainability can mean so many different things. Using responsible materials, minimizing waste, the aspect of social sustainability, creating local production as well, because this is actually thing I feel that we don't talk enough. Most of the production is happening far away from where the brands actually are based, and for me it's like really important to have this local mindset within, and really embrace that, hey, we actually can produce locally, and this will create a lot of positive impact out of all the shipping back and forward, and the emissions caused by that. At the same time, we also create like positive change in the local communities, and support the local communities we're part of. So basically we use a really wide range of different upcycled materials. Basically for the past years I've built most of the collections kind of with this mindset that using approximately half like new sustainable materials like organic cotton, tencel, hemp and so on, and 50% like upcycled materials such as like reused textiles, dead stock, different like waste materials from different industries. The two latest collections I created, I wanted to challenge myself even more, and the two latest collections I created only by using like different upcycled materials. That has been fun and challenging, but I'm really actually happy to be able to do that and showing that, you know, it's possible.
We are on to the next brand. I just had a quick lunch, and now we are headed to our shift.
We are our shift. This is Barbara, and I'm Milan. And what we do, we upcycle clothes and also tents. What we do, we collect tents from festivals, was abandoned in the festival ground, and we took it, take care of it, wash it, and put it into productions. And now they are the wearable pieces. The reason why we do it is because in the fashion industry we burn tons of clothes and also tents, and we are trying to find solutions how to actually upcycle stuff, saving these waste clothes and give them the new life.
With this skirt, like we intentionally keep the 10 strings, for example, or these little, just like put the metal stick through to like ground the tent communication, or like a media for us to really spread the awareness about these kind of issues.
Make less fangs. It's a little bit straightforward and passive-aggressive, but we believe as an activistic brand we need to share this message. Because we also think about the social part of our company, we are bringing these hand-knitted jumpers in it, because they are from the recycled yarns, but they are knit by the older people who lost their significant others, and they are living alone. So we work with the non-profit who combine these people and teach them how to knit and have a social life like this. So that's the story of, for example, this jumper.
I may or may not have gone back to change my clothes Now I am ready for the Alternative Fashion Week, which is a non-exclusive event. There will be talks, there will be a photo exhibit that I am very excited about. One thing that I haven't mentioned about this whole Copenhagen Fashion Week being the most sustainable fashion week in the world is that that's an incredibly Eurocentric thing to say. First of all, with no data, just the vibes, but I also have a really hard time believing that Copenhagen Fashion Week is more sustainable, has lower overall emissions, or however this premise is interpreting sustainability, than, let's say, Senegal or Ghana, communities and economies that are often kept out of the more prestige, luxurious fashion scene. However, they play a vital role in the industry. And I have a very hard time believing that their fashion summits are less sustainable than Copenhagen's. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. The photo exhibit is by Fashion Dump Site and features pictures from textile landfills in Ghana. This is where 40% of the clothes we donate to charity end up. This is because a lot of fast fashion is produced so poorly that it cannot be worn or resold, and the proper infrastructure to handle these millions and millions of tons of clothing simply does not exist. I'm actually working on a separate impact analysis about the second-hand hierarchy in Europe, so this was extremely insightful. I'm back, baby. I got back from Copenhagen Fashion Week last night. I am exhausted. And while I think that Copenhagen Fashion Week and the fashion industry in general gets away with way too much shit and gets away with saying and praising themselves way too much without any follow-up or follow-through, it's been amazing to see how so many platforms have been taking this up and how we are putting pressure on both the Danish media as well as the fashion industry itself to really deliver what they are actually talking about, which has been great to see. Here are my final thoughts and conclusions. So Copenhagen Fashion Week and the trade show that I visited are all happening at the same time as part of Copenhagen Fashion Week, but they're actually two separate entities. And the trade show was recently merged, so it used to be several things and now it's one thing, and the standard for the two different shows were very different. So the trade show both includes brands that are actually trying to do better and brands that then don't give a fuck. The minimum standards put forward by Copenhagen Fashion Week has also been introduced to the trade show. However, they are not being enforced, which to me seems like an issue throughout the entire week, that a lot of brands and corporations and organizations are just pinky promising to do the things that are mentioned in the minimum standards, which aren't enough in and of itself, but then when no one is enforcing it or no one is asking or demanding for proper documentation for these actions, it becomes very just trust me, bro. I think as part of the minimum standards, we should also see a demand for proper documentation of the actions and the effect of those actions. By the way, many of the minimum standards put forward by Copenhagen Fashion Week only applies to shows and the things that are happening at the shows. So while we are seeing minimum standards and requirements regarding size inclusivity, for instance, this has something to do with the show and the things put on the runway, which is just really good PR to be inclusive, you know? But it's very unlikely that a lot of these things will actually be available to normal consumers. They are not being produced for people, they are being produced for the show. And we see this with material inclusivity as well. And we see this with the preferred materials list as well. And at this point, I think it's staggeringly obvious that this has to do with brand value and image and not so much thorough sustainable change. The minimum standards for Copenhagen Fashion Week are both vague and misleading, and the industry is overall very reluctant to have a conversation about reduction of clothing, or let me rephrase, they are willing to have the conversation, but more so as a gimmick. When you're just inviting panelists on platforms to talk about clothes reduction, but not actually doing something, it's a gimmick. What we really should be demanding is a thorough value in reduction of production, traceability and accountability throughout. You cannot just say that you promise you will do things, and then people will say that's okay, you're promising, I trust you. I don't trust any of you, especially not brands that are saying they're sustainable without any proof. The industry is very focused on recycled material, which on a surface level makes sense, but you cannot determine sustainability based solely on materials. It is more so the what's and the hows and the how much that determines sustainability and not what the material is made of. I'm very reluctant to call any material sustainable because you cannot tell if a material is sustainable based only on the material in a vacuum. That doesn't exist. But using recycled material is a good thing, unless it's the only thing you're doing. It's sort of like buying stainless steel straws and tote bags and calling yourself zero waste. We need to see a lot more happening, and there are so many other actions that determine whether or not these things are sustainable than just having these things no context. So, using recycled materials can be a part of someone's low impact profile, but it doesn't determine or define it. Luckily, it's not all bad. There are some amazing people and businesses within this industry that's challenging the status quo through activism and production responsibility, and most importantly, catering to a specific community, serving a community rather than simply just appealing to a bunch of consumers. Throughout this week, I had so many times where I thought this industry is so disconnected from clothing. This industry's relationship with fashion is extremely empty. And I say that based on the fact that this industry's first priority is still quantity and constant renewal. Fashion Week should have a much better focus on how to use natural and human resources of craftsmanship, storytelling, heritage, using fashion and clothing as means of critical thinking and artistic expression in a community. See, now that's what I want to see. There is an industrial, systemic, and political responsibility to create a better framework for consumers to act sustainably within. And this weighs so much higher than individual action. To put it differently, you and I as consumers can treat our clothing in the most sustainable way, repair, buy secondhand, use what we already have, do all these things that we have talked about on this platform so many times. But that has to happen separately from the industry actually living up to just the bare minimum. The bare minimum, please and thank you. By creating a system that favors planet and people over profit. This was a vastly different Fashion Week experience from when I started going 10 years ago, where everything I wanted in the entire world was just to be featured by street style photographers. And while I definitely see myself as a person who loves fashion, I don't love the fashion industry, but we need to have these conversations. And this is relevant to everybody because we all have a relationship with clothing. I hope that you liked this video. If you did, leave me a thumbs up, that would make my day. And let me know your thoughts down below. I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching and have an amazing day. Take really good care of yourselves. Until next time. Bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green, zero-waste content, and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!